One quiet morning in March 2018, a car was found at the bottom of a cliff in Mendocino County, California. The wreckage and the bodies scattered nearby hinted at a terrible accident. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized this wasn't just a tragic crash. There was a much darker story behind it. What drove this family to the edge, and how had no one noticed the warning signs before it was too late? Jennifer Jean Hart, known as Jen, was born on June 4, 1979, in South Dakota, USA. While her mother's name remains private, her father was Douglas, who worked in the Federal Energy Administration. Jen was the eldest of 3 children in the family. They lived in Huron, a small town in eastern South Dakota, where Jen's childhood was surrounded by natural beauty and plenty of opportunities for sports, which she embraced passionately. Breaking away from typical gender expectations, she chose to play baseball with the boys instead of softball. Jen also had a love for animals and developed musical talents alongside her siblings, often playing the trumpet at Christmas church services. Despite the seemingly peaceful family life, Jen's parents divorced when she was 12. She and her siblings stayed with their mother, while Douglas moved to a different part of town, maintaining regular contact with his children. Jen, who was closer to her father, decided at 14 to move in with him. The arrangement worked for a while, but eventually, Jen's behavior became difficult to manage, leading her father to send her back to live with her mother. Despite her rebellious phase, she graduated from high school in 1997 and surprised everyone by enrolling at Augustana University, a conservative Lutheran institution. To further surprise her community, Jen decided to be baptized into the Lutheran Church, despite not being raised in that faith. 2 years later, Jen transferred to Northern State University, where she met Sarah Margaret. Sarah, born on April 8, 1979 in North Dakota, was the oldest of 4 children. The 2 women instantly connected, and before long, they were living together on campus. Both were pursuing education degrees, with Sarah focusing on special education. Though Jen seemed to be moving past her earlier behavioral issues in January 2000, she was caught shoplifting. She admitted to the police that she wasn't sure why she had done it, hinting at personal struggles but without providing details. Ultimately, she pleaded guilty to petty theft. She continued her studies but eventually dropped out, unlike Sarah, who graduated in 2002. By this time, Jen had distanced herself from her family, including her father. Jen never disclosed her relationship with Sarah to him, and according to her father, their falling out had nothing to do with Jen's sexual orientation. After Sarah's graduation, the couple moved to Minnesota, buying a 2-story house near the mall where they both worked. Around this time, they began to share their relationship openly with friends and family. However, this newfound openness caused some friends to distance themselves. In 2005, Sarah legally took Jen's last name, becoming Sarah Hart, and shortly after, they decided to open their home as foster parents. Their first foster child, a 15-year-old girl, later shared that she had intended to stay until she turned 18, but was asked to leave when Jen and Sarah decided to pursue adoption. In 2006, they adopted their first 3 children, Marcus, 8, Hannah, 4, and Abigail, 2, from Colorado County, Texas. 2 years later, they expanded their family with 3 more siblings from Houston, Devonte, 5, Jeremiah, 4, and Sierra, 2. All 6 children were of African American descent. Jen took on the role of stay-at-home mom, documenting her life with the children on social media. She shared everyday moments and culturally enriching activities, including teaching them to play musical instruments and even cutting their hair. She showed how the family celebrated the 30th anniversary of The Goonies, one of her favorite movies, by making matching costumes for everyone. Her online posts also highlighted the children's achievements, such as Marcus's success in a geography competition and Hannah and Jeremiah's recital of the Greek alphabet. In one particularly heartwarming post, she shared how Jeremiah and Abby taught their youngest sister Sierra a kindergarten song. The proud mother frequently shared moments with her followers, including the time when Devonte brought home a sheet full of praise and well wishes from his classmates. Jen's social media accounts were filled with images of the children, many of them holding signs that read, "Love is always beautiful." In those pictures, they often appeared as a perfect family, wearing matching shirts and wide smiles. However, behind closed doors, the reality was quite different from the picture painted online. In 2008, while living in Minnesota, a police report surfaced in which one of the couple's daughters told officers that her mother, Sarah, had hit her with a belt. However, when the authorities questioned the mothers, they both claimed that the girl had fallen down the stairs, and the incident was quickly dismissed. The following year, in 2009, Sarah and Jen traveled to Connecticut to get married, as it was one of the few states where same-sex marriage was legal at the time. Every detail of their ceremony was shared on social media. Despite the picture-perfect life they portrayed, things within the family were far from ideal. On November 15, 2010, Abigail, who was 6 years old at the time, confided in her teacher that she had bruises on her stomach and back, saying one of her mothers had hit her. The teacher confirmed the bruises were visible and reported that Abigail had also mentioned other troubling incidents, including being denied food and having her head dunked in cold water as punishment for allegedly stealing a penny. When investigators questioned the mothers, Sarah admitted to hitting Abigail in a fit of rage, while Jen acknowledged that she was aware of Sarah's violent behavior. Following this confession, the authorities inspected the home and interviewed the children, all of whom confirmed they had been physically punished and deprived of food on several occasions. Sarah pleaded guilty to domestic assault and was sentenced to 90 days in jail. However, she didn't serve the sentence, as she was granted 1 year of community service. Despite this, the children remained in the couple's custody. After the legal case was resolved, Jen and Sarah withdrew their 6 children from the Minnesota public school system and began homeschooling them. In contrast to Jen's usual openness on social media, this decision was kept completely private. Jen later explained on her profiles that she believed public school was not a safe place for her children, citing discrimination due to their race and their mother's sexual orientation. She also claimed that Devonte, in particular, had suffered physical attacks, threats, and insults at school. Although she voiced her grievances about public education, Jen never mentioned the homeschooling decision on social media. Instead, she posted a photo of the 6 children sitting in a forest clearing, captioned, "Science Class in the Woods." During this time, the family faced other challenges. According to court documents, Jen and Sarah made over 30 calls to the police, reporting instances of discrimination and aggression due to their sexual orientation. Their neighbor, whom they had accused, later admitted to behaving inappropriately. In 2011, Jen shared moments from her life online, including her attendance at music festivals and her excitement about forming a circle of friends who even organized a party for Devante. She frequently posted photos of him, often emphasizing how special he was in their household. However, their seemingly strong family facade began to crack when Sarah had to relocate to Portland, Oregon, for work. Jen stayed behind with the children for 6 months until they sold their house and moved to Portland. Shortly after their arrival in Portland in April 2013, a local photographer captured an image of Devante dancing. Jen shared the photo online, praising her son's infectious joy. Around this time, Jen befriended a woman at a charity concert who later described Jen as a kind, sensitive, and compassionate person. However, the woman also noticed that Jen interacted mostly with Devante and Jeremiah, while the other children seemed distant, often with their heads buried in books. She described Abigail as outgoing, Marcus as shy, and Sierra as full of laughter. Jen confided in her new friend that raising the children was incredibly challenging, and she mentioned that the kids had been removed from school because they were punished more harshly than others. Jen also claimed that her children were born with addiction issues due to their birth mother's drug use, which led to them overeating because they didn't know how to behave. She explained that the children seemed younger than they were, attributing it to genetics and their difficult early lives. According to Jen, the children would never be able to live independently, work, marry, or have children of their own. She believed they would never lead normal lives. Despite these alarming remarks, no legal documents were found to support Jen's claims about the children's conditions. Outwardly, the family seemed to be loving, though concerns about their well-being began to arise. On July 19, 2013, the police filed a report based on concerns about the children's welfare, which was referred to Oregon's Department of Human Services. Details of the report emerged later when a neighbor from the Hart's neighborhood came forward. She accused the couple of abusing their children by withholding food, calling their treatment of the kids emotionally abusive, controlling, and cruel. Investigators uncovered additional testimonies from neighbors who reported that the children were subjected to strict and unusual rules. They were required to raise their hands before speaking, were not allowed to celebrate birthdays, and were forbidden from laughing at the dinner table. It was also clear that the children lived in fear of their adoptive mothers. Despite these alarming claims, when authorities interviewed the children, they all insisted that they were treated well. It was apparent that the children had been coached by their mothers on what to say, but without concrete evidence, there was no legal action the authorities could take. When questioned by investigators, Jen argued that any accusations against her were rooted in prejudice. She claimed that people were intolerant of a white lesbian couple raising 6 African American children. Ultimately, Oregon's Department of Human Services concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to proceed further. Around the same time, an event occurred that brought one of the children into the international spotlight, unrelated to the accusations the family faced. In November 2014, a large protest took place in Oregon following the death of Michael Brown, an African-American teenager killed by police in an incident where Brown was unarmed. A grand jury decided not to indict the white police officer responsible, sparking nationwide protests. During one such protest in Oregon, Devante was photographed with tears streaming down his face as he embraced a white police officer. The image quickly went viral, labeled as the most heartfelt hug in the world, becoming a symbol of social activism. Soon after, Jen and Sarah decided to move their family to Washington. Jen told those around her that they no longer felt safe in Oregon, citing racial threats and strange noises outside their home. They claimed to have contacted the police several times about these incidents, but police records showed no such calls. What was documented, however, were multiple calls to the police from their new neighbors in Washington, expressing concerns about the welfare of the children. In November 2017, the first of many alerts was made when 12-year-old Hannah was seen crawling out of a window in the middle of the night and fleeing to a neighbor's house. When Sarah and Jen arrived to retrieve her, Hannah begged the neighbor not to let her go, claiming she was being mistreated. Unfortunately, the neighbor handed Hannah back to her mother's. The next day, Jen attempted to smooth things over with the neighbors, explaining that Hannah was lying. She attributed her erratic behavior to her biological parents, saying Hannah's birth mother was bipolar and her father had been addicted to drugs. But this incident was not the last to bring attention to the family. In March 2018, Washington's Department of Social and Health Services launched an investigation into the family after receiving reports of potential neglect and abuse. The complaints came from another set of concerned neighbors who had clear evidence that the children were not being adequately fed. This couple later spoke to the media, revealing that Devante frequently came to their house asking for food, sometimes several times a day. He confided in them that his mothers were withholding food as punishment. The couple also expressed their alarm at how thin and small the children appeared. One of their daughters was missing 2 front teeth, and when they asked Jen and Sarah about it, they claimed that the girl simply didn't want her teeth replaced. This explanation did little to convince the neighbors. On top of these disturbing accounts, there was yet another failed escape attempt by one of the girls. Covered in bruises, she showed up at the couple's door late one night, having walked through thorny bushes trying to flee her home. She pleaded for help, saying her mothers were mistreating her and begging not to be sent back. Unfortunately, the gravity of the situation wasn't fully realized by the couple that night. When they saw Jen and Sarah searching for the girl with flashlights, they returned her to her mother's. According to reports, Washington's Child Protective Services claimed they had no previous records of concerns about the family, either in Washington or in any other state, despite earlier allegations elsewhere in the U.S. It seemed that time and time again, the system failed the children. By the time authorities finally resolved the bureaucratic issues and arrived at the Hart family's home, it was too late. Jen and Sarah had already left, taking the children with them. What follows is a reconstruction of events based on the findings of the authorities. In the days leading up to the tragedy, social services attempted to contact Jen and Sarah on 3 separate occasions without success. It was later revealed that on March 24, 2018, Jen, Sarah, and their 6 children left Oregon and began traveling south on the highway, eventually reaching North Carolina. The next morning, on March 25, 2018, Jen was spotted at a grocery store, purchasing food. The family stayed in the area until later that night when they continued their journey. Tragedy struck on March 26, 2018, when the family's SUV was discovered at the base of a cliff in Mendocino County, California. According to investigators, Jen was behind the wheel. She had stopped the vehicle at a pullout on the highway before accelerating off the cliff. Both Jen and 39-year-old Sarah were found dead inside the vehicle, while 3 of their children, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Marcus, were found lifeless outside the SUV. 2 weeks later, Sierra's body was discovered on a nearby beach, and in May, part of a foot inside a shoe was found on another beach. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Hannah. Devante's body was never recovered, but authorities concluded that he too had perished, and a judge issued his death certificate on April 3, 2019. Following this horrific incident, a thorough investigation, though tragically late, was conducted, sparking public outrage and accusations of negligence. Investigators discovered that during the road trip, while Jen drove, Sarah, seated in the passenger seat, had conducted several troubling internet searches. These included how to induce drowsiness using over-the-counter medications, how long it takes to die from hypothermia in a car, and one of her final searches, how to find a shelter for their dogs. This was particularly shocking, as the couple had left their 2 dogs at home, showing a compassion they tragically did not extend to their children. After the murders of their 6 children, authorities searched the family's last residence. The home appeared clean, orderly, and newly renovated. While Jen and Sarah's personal spaces were fully furnished and decorated, the children's rooms were bare. Investigators noted that the family's luggage was still in the house, and none of them had even packed a toothbrush before leaving. The evidence pointed to a premeditated act, and one of the officers involved in the case concluded that Jen and Sarah, feeling cornered by the accusations against them, made the conscious decision to end their lives, and tragically, to take their children with them. Psychological evaluation suggested that the couple believed if they couldn't keep the children, no one else should. Toxicology reports revealed that Jen, who had been driving, had consumed the equivalent of 5 beers, enough to impair her abilities. Witnesses later stated that Jen rarely drank, fueling speculation that she may have consumed alcohol to muster the courage to carry out the grim plan. Additionally, traces of a sedative were found in the systems of Sarah and 2 of the children. This case shocked society, especially those who had followed the family's seemingly happy life on social media. For nearly a decade, Jen had shared photos of the children posing next to displays of food, vegetarian burgers, fresh vegetables, berries, and chocolate cream pies. These images starkly contrasted with the allegations that Jen and Sarah routinely deprived the children of food. The disconnect between their social media persona and the reality behind closed doors was a haunting element of the case. Moreover, Jen and Sarah's repeated claims that their children were in their home to be safe clashed harshly with the testimony of the children themselves and their ultimate fate. While Jen and Sarah can no longer be questioned or held accountable for what happened on that California cliff, the investigation has been officially closed. Their deaths were ruled as suicides, and the deaths of their 6 children were classified as homicides. Beyond the horrifying actions of Jen and Sarah, this case has drawn intense criticism of the system that was meant to protect the children. Time and time again, the system failed them. Authorities in 5 states had been involved in the children's adoptions and the abuse allegations, but none had managed to prevent this tragic ending. This has sparked widespread debate in the media and among the public about the need for better federal oversight of child abuse cases. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Before the summer of 1988, the Carr family led an idyllic life in the small town of Alturas. Known for their unwavering faith, they attended church every Sunday and were the epitome of a peaceful, trouble-free family. However, this serene existence was shattered on June 14th when 16-year-old Dwayne discovered a menacing letter in their mailbox. The anonymous note was stark and terrifying, demanding the family leave Florida or face deadly consequences. Understandably shaken, Dwayne rushed to show his parents. His mother, Peggy, was immediately gripped by fear, while her husband, Lynn, dismissed it as a cruel joke. As summer turned to fall, the family's unease grew, culminating on October 23rd. Peggy suddenly fell gravely ill, plagued by severe nausea and excruciating pain. Her once vibrant hair began to fall out in alarming amounts. Despite the worsening symptoms, Lynn refused to take Peggy to the hospital, believing it was just a passing illness. But Peggy's condition rapidly declined. Within a week, she slipped into a coma. To the family's horror, Dwayne soon began exhibiting the same symptoms as his mother. The situation reached a critical point, prompting a police investigation. On December 2nd, authorities uncovered a shocking revelation. The family's sickness was caused by thallium, a lethal chemical commonly found in rat poison. Tests confirmed that every member of the Carr family, including Lynn, had dangerously high levels of this poison in their systems. As the investigation deepened, the chilling realization set in. Someone was systematically targeting the Carr family. The letter was no prank. It was a harbinger of the terror to come. The race was now on to identify the perpetrator and stop them before they could strike again. The year was 1988. 16-year-old Dwayne lived a blissful life with his family in the serene town of Alturas, Florida. His mother, Peggy, worked tirelessly as a waitress at the local diner. After raising 3 children on her own, Peggy finally found love with Lynn Carr, who brought 2 more children into their blended family. Their life in Alturas seemed perfect. A quiet town where no one locked their doors, an ideal place to raise a family. But on October 23rd, their lives took a tragic turn. In the early hours, Peggy left for work as usual. However, soon after arriving at the diner, she began to feel a burning sensation in her legs and feet, followed by intense chest pain. She was rushed to the hospital, almost incapacitated. Despite thorough testing, doctors couldn't pinpoint the cause of her illness and sent her home with pain medication. A week later, on October 30th, the nightmare escalated. Peggy, Dwayne, and his stepbrother Travis were all rushed to the hospital with identical symptoms. The pain was unbearable, leaving them in tears thinking they were going to die. Peggy was admitted to the intensive care unit. An infectious disease specialist noticed something alarming. Peggy's hair was falling out in clumps, a sign that pointed to possible poisoning. He decided to test for thallium, a deadly poison banned in the U.S. in 1972, but still present in old rat poison. The test results were horrifying. Peggy had 50 times the lethal amount of thallium in her system. The next day, October 31st, she fell into a coma. Travis was put on a respirator and Dwayne showed no signs of improvement. The police launched an urgent investigation. Their goal was clear: find the source of the poisoning to prevent further harm. They scoured the orange groves, tested the neighborhood water supply, and even examined the diner where Peggy worked. Yet, no traces of thallium were found. As news spread, panic gripped the community. People demanded answers, fearing for their own safety. Investigators descended upon the Carr home, meticulously collecting dust samples and gathering over 400 household items for lab analysis. One of these items raised alarm bells, a six-pack of Coke bottles, three of which remained unopened. Tests revealed that each contained more than a gram of thallium, enough to kill an adult. The detective in charge quickly realized there were only two possible scenarios. The first involved product tampering at the Coke factory. If that were the case, how many more people might have consumed the poison? The potential spread could reach far beyond the county, possibly affecting the entire state or even the nation. Fear spread rapidly, with locals terrified to drink Coke. The investigation's initial focus was on the bottling company. However, with Coca-Cola's cooperation, large-scale tampering was swiftly ruled out. It was deemed physically impossible to tamper with the product at the plant. This left the police with only one conclusion. This was a targeted attack on Peggy Carr and her family. The investigation turned inward, examining family members closely. Peggy's husband, Perielen Carr, emerged as a primary suspect. Despite being married for only 7 months, the couple's honeymoon period had been short-lived. Perielen worked long hours at the mine, and Peggy had grown suspicious. One night, she discovered him with another woman. Adding to the suspicion, the weekend Peggy first fell ill, Perielen was conveniently out of town. Upon his return, he resisted taking her to the hospital. As investigators delved deeper into Perielen's background, they sought any motive that might explain why he would poison his wife. Despite his troubling behavior, one question nagged at the police. Why would Perielen poison his own son, Travis? During interrogation, Perielen revealed a puzzling clue. On June 14th, 4 months before Peggy fell ill, Dwayne found a letter in the mailbox. The letter contained a yellow post-it with a threatening typewritten note, warning the family to leave Florida within 2 weeks or face death. Dwayne and his siblings initially laughed it off, but Perielen's dismissive attitude now seemed more suspicious. The police later learned that this was not the first ominous incident in the Carr household. A few years prior, 2 of their dogs had died suddenly, both exhibiting symptoms of severe illness and hair loss. This led to a chilling suspicion. They might have been used for experimentation. As Peggy's health continued to deteriorate and Dwayne and Travis showed no signs of improvement, the entire family underwent testing for thallium. The results were far more alarming than anyone anticipated. Every member of the household, including Perielen Carr, had traces of thallium in their system. This revelation cleared Perielen as a suspect, as it seemed implausible that someone with the knowledge to commit such a crime would risk ingesting the poison themselves. Even Peggy's 2-year-old granddaughter, Casey, had traces of thallium. On March 3, 1989, after 5 months of suffering, Peggy's condition reached its tragic conclusion. Dwayne was called to her bedside for the final time as the family faced the heartbreaking decision to remove her from life support. Peggy Carr passed away at the age of 41, leaving the family devastated. With Peggy's death, the investigation took a new turn. It was now a murder case. Poisoning someone is a rare and calculated method of murder, often devised by a demented yet brilliant mind. The FBI's examination of the contaminated Coke bottles revealed tiny scratch marks, indicating they had been meticulously tampered with. The thallium had been added, the caps resealed, and the bottles appeared untouched. Thallium, being tasteless and odorless, dissolves easily but usually causes noticeable changes in soda. However, the mixture found in the Coke bottles was sophisticated, avoiding typical signs like overflow, discoloration, or sediment. This pointed to the work of someone with advanced knowledge of chemistry, a highly intelligent individual who believed they were smarter than everyone else. Police began questioning neighbors and townspeople. Alturas, a small community of a few hundred residents, saw every single person interviewed as investigators sought to uncover the perpetrator behind this heinous act. The closest neighbors to the Carr family were George Trepal and his wife, Diana. When the detectives questioned Trepal, his reaction was shockingly harsh. Trepal launched into a tirade about the redneck children and family living next to him. When asked why anyone would want to poison the Carr family, Trepal's response was unsettlingly specific. Someone wanted them to leave. This echoed the exact message in the threatening letter received by the Carrs, a detail only known to law enforcement. This peculiar response made Trepal a prime suspect. Further investigation revealed that George Trepal was a self-taught chemist, while his wife Diana held a master's degree in chemistry. Both were members of an elite society for individuals with IQs in the top 2% of the population. Digging deeper, investigators discovered Trepal had a criminal background. He had served time in prison for being the chemist in a major methamphetamine operation. One of the ingredients commonly used in producing methamphetamine is thallium. The spotlight on George Trepal as a person of interest shocked even Peggy's son, Dwayne, who couldn't believe Trepal was capable of such a heinous act. The detectives uncovered that Trepal had previously had a confrontation with the Carr family over loud music. Just 48 hours after this argument, Peggy Carr was poisoned. Despite these connections, the police lacked concrete proof to arrest Trepal. Standard police procedure often involves bringing a suspect in for questioning, hoping for a confession. However, detectives believed this approach wouldn't work with Trepal, an introverted and non-confrontational individual. Instead, the FBI proposed a different strategy. Someone had to go undercover to outsmart Trepal. The police assigned Special Agent Susan Gorick to infiltrate the group to which George Trepal belonged. The aim was to gain Trepal's trust and gather enough evidence to prove his involvement in the poisoning. Initially, it seemed that Detective Susan Gorick would only need to go undercover for a weekend. However, she was warned about Trepal's photographic memory. If he saw them, he could remember their cars or faces. Under an assumed identity, Susan prepared to attend a murder mystery gathering hosted by George Trepal and his wife, Diana. Susan Gorick transformed into a woman on the verge of divorcing an abusive husband. On April 14, 1989, she headed to the local hotel where the event was being held. Upon arrival, she was greeted by none other than George Trepal himself. Face to face with the suspected killer, Susan's biggest fear was that Trepal might recognize her from previous surveillance operations. She took a deep breath, searching for any sign of recognition in his eyes, but Trepal didn't seem to recognize her. Nevertheless, Susan had to remain vigilant. In her undercover role, Susan knew Trepal was not the type to confront directly. He was the kind who would poison his victims, causing a slow and painful death. The risk was immense. Introducing herself as Sherry Gwynn, she registered for the event and received a packet containing the weekend's information, prepared by Trepal himself. The pamphlet detailed several well-planned murder scenarios, one of which involved poisoning. One paragraph in particular stood out. It mentioned that when a death threat appears on the doorstep, prudent people throw out all their food and watch what they eat. The message was strikingly similar to the one the Carr family had received before Peggy was poisoned. This eerie similarity convinced Susan she had the right suspect. Throughout the weekend, Susan engaged Trapal in conversation, carefully watching every word he said, knowing one slip could cost her life. When Trapal asked about her background, Susan mentioned her fictional husband, a lawyer from Houston, Texas, and how she had left him. Trapal shared how he could tell when someone was lying by the way their neck muscles moved, making Susan even more nervous. Before the weekend ended, she confided in Trapal that she intended to move to Florida to escape her husband. This revelation led to a crucial breakthrough. Trapal mentioned that he and his wife were considering moving her practice and selling their house. After consulting with her supervisors, Detective Susan was instructed to continue her undercover operation beyond the initial weekend. Susan knew this extended mission was her chance to find crucial evidence that could secure a search warrant for Trapal's house. She hoped to discover lab equipment or chemicals that would link Trapal to the crime. The following week, Susan visited Trapal's house. During the tour, Trapal mentioned how safe Alturas was, boasting that no one locked their doors. Although Susan noticed several suspicious items, including a secret passageway in the library and a mannequin with bondage gear, none were sufficient for a search warrant. Despite the failed plan, Susan maintained her Sherry Gwynn persona, determined to gather more evidence. She was acutely aware of the risks. Exposing her true identity could lead to her and her family's harm. Trapal, a highly intelligent individual, could easily resort to poisoning her if he discovered she was an undercover detective. Over the next several months, Susan met with Trapal for a series of lunch dates, always under surveillance. She never ate or drank anything after leaving the table, wary of Trapal's potential to harm her. During these meetings, Trapal gradually revealed his disdain for people he considered less intelligent, giving Susan insights into his mindset. After 8 months, Susan had collected numerous small pieces of evidence, but not enough to build a solid case. Her supervisors began to question the operation's value, threatening to shut it down. To Susan, failure was not an option. She was driven by the need to secure justice for Peggy Carr and her family, imagining how it could have been her own loved ones who drank the poison. In December 1989, Susan received the breakthrough call she had been waiting for. George and Diana Trapal had moved out of town and offered Sherry Gwynn the chance to move into their home. Without needing a warrant, Susan now had legal permission to enter the house and invite the county crime scene unit to investigate. Believing Trapal was too clever to leave obvious traces of thallium, the team focused on finding residue in places like the air conditioning filter or drains. The house was still filled with Trapal's belongings, providing ample opportunities for collecting samples. In the garage of George Trapal's house, investigators collected vials and chemistry bottles, hoping one would test positive for thallium. As they awaited results from the FBI lab, Susan continued her role as Sherry Gwynn, even as ideas and scenarios to engage Trapal ran thin. Time was running out. By January 1990, with no news from the lab, Susan knew she had to take action. She decided to try and trick Trapal into incriminating himself, unaware that Trapal was also preparing a trap for her. Susan arranged a meeting with Trapal at a picnic area behind a McDonald's in Sebring, the town where he was living. This critical meeting was recorded on tape. During their conversation, Susan handed Trapal a business card claiming it was left by detectives searching for him. Trapal's behavior changed noticeably. He became extremely nervous. His agitation was palpable as he tried to maintain composure. He repeatedly asked Susan to come over to his new house, which she declined. The tension was high. What might have happened if she had agreed to visit his home? After the meeting, Trapal walked away visibly shaken, his nerves clearly frayed by the news Susan had shared. This encounter marked a turning point. On April 4, 1990, Susan received an unexpected call. The FBI had found thallium in one of the vials collected from Trapal's garage. Specifically, it contained thallium nitrate, the exact compound used in the poisoning of Peggy Carr and the attempted murder of her entire family. This discovery was the crucial piece of evidence needed to solidify the case against Trapal. The following day, April 5th, George Trapal was arrested at his new home in Sebring. The sight of Trapal being escorted in an orange jumpsuit into the county jail marked the end of a long and dangerous investigation. The same man Susan had to trust during her undercover mission was now facing justice for his crimes. Even when confronted with the truth about her identity, George Trapal remained unfazed. Susan, now revealing herself as S. Special Agent from the county sheriff's office, served him with a warrant for handwriting samples. Trapal simply smiled and responded, "Oh, okay." Unbeknownst to Susan, she had narrowly escaped becoming Trapal's next victim. When police searched Trapal's home in Sebring, they made a shocking discovery. Behind a pegboard, they found a hidden room with no inside door handle and a sealed, soundproof window. Inside, there was a platform bed equipped with wooden stirrups and a pulley system designed to lift people. Trapal had been constructing a bed for torture. The realization of what could have happened if she had visited his home was horrifying for Susan. In January 1991, as George Trapal's trial began, the jury was presented with overwhelming evidence. Among the items collected from Trapal's house was a journal titled General Poisoning Guides, which described thallium as the poison of choice for criminals. The journal contained references to getting rid of neighbors, and 55 fingerprints in the journal matched Trapal's. The prosecution also showcased the tools used to tamper with the Coke bottles. A set of tiny screwdrivers, one of which was missing, perfectly matched the tool marks on the bottle caps. This damning evidence shocked the jury. Throughout the trial, Trapal remained calm and emotionless, sometimes even smiling. His lack of remorse and his calculated actions demonstrated a chilling level of evil. He had justified his heinous acts with his belief in his superior intelligence and the idea that those less intelligent did not deserve to live. The trial lasted 2 months, but it only took the jury 4 hours to reach a verdict. On March 6, 1991, nearly 2 years after Peggy Carr's death, George Trapal was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to death. The final sentence was delivered with gravitas. The defendant, George James Trapal, shall be electrocuted until he is dead. With these words, justice was served for Peggy Carr. Special Agent Susan's relentless dedication and bravery brought a criminal mastermind to justice. She risked everything, putting her life on the line to ensure Trapal faced the consequences of his heinous actions. Reflecting on Susan's efforts, one cannot help but admire her courage. She went above and beyond to bring Peggy's killer to justice, earning the respect and gratitude of many. The rest of Peggy Carr's family, who were also poisoned, made full recoveries. However, the loss of Peggy had a profound impact on her son, Dwayne. Losing his mother at the tender age of 16 was a traumatic experience that left deep emotional scars. In the years following her death, Dwayne struggled with grief, often expressing it through anger and outbursts. Eventually, Dwayne found solace in writing to his mother. In a heartfelt letter, he poured out his emotions. "Dear Mom, this is your baby boy. I'd like to tell you that I love you and I'm sorry for all the bad things I've ever done to you. Hopefully, you're in a better place now. I often think about you and wish you were here. I haven't been so good and I'm sorry. I'll try to get my life straight." Dwayne made good on his promise. Today, he is married and has become the father figure his own family deserves. Every day, he strives to make his mother proud and keep her memory alive. Dwayne Dauberly stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, showing that even after unimaginable tragedy, a life worth living is possible. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
We are very grateful and relieved that an arrest has been made in connection with Rachel's murder. Rachel was a mother, daughter, sister, and a friend. Rachel's absence from our lives has left many broken hearts and great devastation.
Rachel Pernosky was born on June 15, 1994, in Mission, British Columbia, Canada. Details about her early life are scarce, but it's known that she grew up surrounded by the love of her mother and sister. Those who knew Rachel as a child with beautiful green eyes often commented on her infectious laughter, which could brighten anyone's day. Information about her father is limited. It's only known that he was far from exemplary, had multiple relationships, and fathered several children with different women. Rachel was always friendly and well-liked. At one point in her life, she maintained a close relationship with her half-brother on her father's side, Matthew Pernosky, who was nearly 10 years older than her. Matthew was born in 1985 when his mother was only 18. His parents separated when he was young, and at 2 years old, he was sent to live with his father and stepmother. When he was 11, he returned to his mother's home, apparently due to conflicts with his stepmother. Matthew claimed that his stepmother physically abused him, hitting him with spoons while his father did nothing to protect him. Feeling unprotected, Matthew eventually moved back with his mother, resulting in almost no further contact with his father. As time went on, Matthew found it increasingly difficult to connect with people. He left his mother's home and moved in with his grandparents, who later divorced. During his youth, he was sexually abused by an older neighbor, a secret he kept to himself. Matthew felt blamed for his grandparents' separation and believed his mother had abandoned him early in his childhood and saw him as a burden when he returned during his teenage years. Additionally, he felt rejected by his father. This combination of negative emotions significantly impacted him. After many years of not communicating with his father, Matthew attempted to reconnect by providing his contact information, but he never heard back. During this period, he maintained a relationship with his stepbrother and lived with him at their grandfather's house for a while after both had left their father's home. However, this arrangement didn't last long, as they were both eventually kicked out of their grandfather's house. Amidst these complex situations, Matthew did not finish high school. However, he managed to attend a diploma program at a university and obtained a securities license. In his early 20s, Matthew's father separated from the stepmother who had abused him during his childhood. Matthew hoped this would improve their relationship, but it did not. In his early 20s, He struggled to overcome the pain and anger from the rejection he experienced from his grandfather and mother, who insisted he needed psychological help, believing his perspective was distorted. However, Matthew resisted seeking professional help. It appears he was diagnosed with depression at the age of 20, but did not take any medication or attend therapy to address it. Instead, he turned to less conventional methods to cope with his pain, leading him to substance abuse. His already erratic behavior worsened due to these habits, resulting in actions he would later regret. Turning back to the life of Rachel, Matthew's half-sister, it is known that her life was also challenging, but she had the unconditional love of her mother and sister. The charming girl fell in love at a young age and became pregnant. She and the baby's father welcomed the child, named Marco, as a blessing, though they did not live together. At 18, Rachel was going through a difficult time, living in a basement suite in Mission and being unemployed. Marco, who was a year old at that time, lived with his father and paternal grandmother since Rachel couldn't provide the quality of life he deserved. However, she remained a loving mother who kept in close contact and visited her son on Fridays and Sundays. In mid-March 2013, Rachel had planned to go shopping with a friend. When Rachel failed to show up, her friend became worried and contacted Brittany, Rachel's sister. Brittany immediately went to the basement apartment Rachel occupied to check on her. Upon arrival, she found no signs of forced entry, but two things were unusual. Rachel's cell phone was left at home, and music was playing. It was out of character for the young mother to leave without her phone or to leave the radio on. The family informed the police about her disappearance, stating that the teenage mother was last seen on March 16, 2013, at her home in Mission. Shortly before her disappearance, Rachel had been active on various social media accounts, posting photos on Instagram and tweeting about incidents in her hometown. She had no history of running away, prompting the police to categorize her disappearance as concerning. Rachel's neighbor recalled seeing her wearing jeans with sparkly decorations on the back pockets and a purple sweater. Rachel was at her house in Mission, smoking and drinking with a man in a baseball cap around midnight on Saturday. The neighbor, who was also outside smoking a cigarette with her husband, didn't notice anything unusual or felt the need to call the police, as it seemed like Rachel was just having a friendly conversation. By 1 a.m., the neighbor looked outside again and saw that the pair had left. The following Sunday, volunteers cleaning up the northeast corner of the highway informed the police they had found clothing matching the description of what Rachel was last seen wearing. However, police investigations determined that the clothing found was not related to Rachel's case. The family was desperate due to her unusual absence. Unfortunately, after days of exhaustive searching by family, friends, and police, Rachel's body was discovered on Tuesday night. Her body was found in a ditch about 30 miles from her home by a passerby who saw it from the road and called the police. Due to the difficult terrain, a search and rescue team was called to retrieve Rachel's body. The detective stated that the initial search effort involved 25 officers but didn't anticipate the case ending in homicide. Sergeant Jennifer Pound of the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, Canada's largest homicide unit, said in a press conference that although Rachel's murder didn't appear random, the police had no suspects in custody and no definitive motive. However, she clarified that they were not idle and had already interviewed several individuals. Officer Jennifer noted that it was still unclear whether the young woman was killed at the location where her body was found or if she had been dumped there. She added that the social media accounts Rachel frequently used could be crucial in identifying the killer. The results of the autopsy were expected within hours but would not be made public due to the ongoing investigation. Sergeant Jennifer also stated that Rachel's murder had left a void in her family, made even more painful by the fact that she had left behind a small child. She urged anyone with information that could help solve the case to come forward to the police. 2 days after Rachel's body was discovered, over 300 people braved the wind to pay tribute to the young woman at a heartfelt vigil in Heritage Park, Mission. Among the attendees were the father of Rachel's child, who held their baby in his arms, along with other family members, friends, and community members. The atmosphere was filled with sorrow and disbelief, as many of those present had participated in the search for Rachel and never imagined it would end so tragically. Speakers at the vigil remembered Rachel for her positive attitude and sense of humor. Despite the initial outpouring of grief and tributes, time marched on. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Life went on for everyone, while the case seemed to stagnate or be forgotten, at least in the eyes of Rachel's family. What they didn't know was that detectives had been diligently working behind the scenes, relentlessly gathering evidence to bring the perpetrator to justice. The most shocking revelation was the direction the investigation had taken and the closeness of the perpetrator to the victim. On June 23, 2016, there was enough evidence to support charges related to Rachel's murder, and on June 24th, the responsible party was arrested without incident. On June 27, 2016, after 3 years of investigation, the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team announced that they had sufficient evidence to support the charges. The accused turned out to be none other than Rachel's half-brother on her father's side, who was 27 years old at the time of the murder. Matthew, then 31 and residing in Richmond, was charged with second-degree murder, along with a second, particularly heinous charge: desecration of a corpse for having sexual contact with Rachel's dead body and disposing of it. Sergeant Jennifer stated that it was a tragic case that had left a family with many unanswered questions. She clarified that from the beginning, the investigative bodies had worked together to follow the evidence and bring charges. She mentioned that it took 3 solid years of dedication and commitment from all the investigators involved to achieve justice for Rachel. She noted that Matthew had been considered a person of interest from the start of the investigation, but they needed to carefully piece together all the facts to avoid jeopardizing the extensive efforts made. A statement written on behalf of Rachel's family was also read, expressing their gratitude and relief at the arrest of the suspected killer, though the wait for justice continued. The start of the trial was delayed longer than Rachel's family had hoped. It wasn't until 2018 that the case finally went to court. Just as the trial was set to begin, Matthew, her half-brother, pleaded guilty to her murder. Matthew's guilty plea resulted in an automatic life sentence, but a judge during the sentencing hearing had to decide how long he should remain behind bars before being eligible for parole. For second-degree murder, the sentence typically ranges from 10 to 25 years. The Crown's lawyers and the defense attorneys presented a joint recommendation to the court in June 2018, suggesting that Matthew could be eligible for parole after serving 13 years in prison. On July 4, 2018, as scheduled, the sentencing hearing took place in the British Columbia Supreme Court. Wendy Stephen, representing the Crown, recounted that Matthew was arrested and charged following an operation called Mr. Big, in which an undercover agent posed as the head of a criminal organization. Details of the trial were published online by the Abbotsford News, a community newspaper in Abbotsford, British Columbia. It was revealed that Matthew confessed to Mr. Big that he had killed Rachel, with whom he shared the same father. The confession was recorded with hidden cameras. Wendy, the Crown representative, explained that on the night of the murder, Matthew had gone to Rachel's residence to apologize for abusing her when she was a child. He was 14 or 15 years old at the time of the assault and was found guilty at 19, receiving a sentence of probation, as disclosed in court. Wendy also detailed that Rachel had exchanged text messages with a friend, who asked how her conversation with Matthew was going. She replied that it had been a good, emotional conversation, but that she was very tired and hoped he would go home soon. Matthew saw this message and became enraged. The prosecutor continued, highlighting that Matthew confessed in 2016 to the undercover officer that Rachel's text message made it seem like she was the victim, while he felt he had suffered through the accusations and judicial process. To Matthew, the fact that he had sexually abused his sister when she was just a child seemed insignificant. Wendy explained that, in a fit of rage, Matthew hit Rachel on the head, immobilized her, and suffocated her by covering her mouth and nose with his hand. He then transported her body to his residence in Abbotsford, sexually assaulted the corpse, and disposed of it. After committing these crimes, Matthew tried to cover his tracks by sending text messages from Rachel's phone after her death and getting rid of her keys and other personal items. When it was the defense's turn, the defense attorney argued that the murder had been a traumatic event in Matthew's life, leading to panic attacks, sleepless nights, flashbacks, and nightmares, requiring treatment for depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, which he was receiving in prison. He claimed that Matthew had an unstable childhood, shuffling between parents and grandparents, which generated a lot of unresolved anger and frustration. However, she stated that he could improve as he was participating in prison programs that helped him understand his issues. The courtroom was filled with Rachel's family and friends who had to listen to the horrific details recounted by the prosecutor about Rachel's suffering and the defense's argument portraying Matthew as a victim. Wendy then read the victim impact statements aloud, representing Rachel's sister, mother, and the father of her child, detailing the devastating emotional toll her death had taken on the family. On July 4, 2018, the judge agreed with the joint sentencing recommendation made by the Crown and defense attorneys during the June hearing. He stated before the British Columbia Supreme Court that he believed 13 years was an appropriate time for Matthew to become eligible for parole, based on sentences in similar cases. He emphasized that Matthew would still serve a life sentence, even if granted parole, as he would always be subject to certain conditions. He added that parole was never guaranteed and could be revoked. He described Matthew's actions as repulsive. After the court session, Rachel's sister expressed that her family felt relieved but mostly exhausted by the entire experience. She added that the family was not surprised by Matthew's guilty plea, as they had always suspected him, despite lacking evidence. Responding to Matthew's claims of suffering, Brittany emphasized that Rachel was the only victim and that Matthew could portray himself as a martyr to gain sympathy or pity, but he was not a victim. She stressed the importance of remembering this crucial fact. Perhaps the most poignant evidence of the tragedy's impact was contained in a letter the family provided to Sergeant Jennifer. In it, they expressed that Rachel was a mother, daughter, sister, and friend, and her absence had left many broken hearts and great devastation, as she was missed and remembered every day. They described Rachel as a sweet, strong, and beautiful young woman with her entire life ahead of her, but she would never get the chance to live out her dreams. They highlighted that her senseless murder left behind a child who would never know his mother and would one day need answers to questions no child should have to ask. The family noted they no longer had words to describe their pain or the difficulty of processing everything that had happened, and they requested privacy while expressing gratitude that justice was served, though nothing could ever compensate for the loss of Rachel's young life. Finally, Brittany said the family hoped to use their experience to help others going through similar tragic circumstances. She emphasized that there should be more support in such painful situations. She remarked that no mother should have to close her deceased daughter's bank account or receive mail addressed to her dead daughter in response to some bureaucratic procedure, as it was too difficult to bear. Brittany suggested that it would be very helpful to have someone designated to handle tasks, such as making phone calls to various government agencies so that families wouldn't have to repeatedly explain that their loved one had passed away. She announced that, holding on to hope, the family was trying to focus on raising Marco, Rachel's son, who was 6 years old at the time of the sentencing and was as good and smart as his mother. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. A young girl vanishes from a close-knit community.
Where is 8-year-old Sandra Cantu?
Parents are in a state of panic as the police search for the missing girl.
Ahorita los niños no salen a jugar.
Even today, we don't let our children play out in the front yard, only in the backyard.
We're all searching frantically for 8-year-old Sandra Cantu.
Sandra Renee Cantu, born on March 8, 2001, was the daughter of Maria Chavez and Daniel Cantu, a couple of Hispanic origin. Sandra lived with her mother, grandparents, and 3 older siblings, 2 sisters aged 20 and 11, and a 15-year-old brother, in a trailer park named Orchard Estates. This park, consisting of about 100 homes, was known as a safe and family-friendly community in the city of Tracy. Sandra's father, Daniel, resided in Mexico and had limited contact with her. Tracy is a city in Northern California with a population of around 80,000 people. It is considered a suburb of the San Francisco Bay Area, with roughly 70% of its workforce employed in Silicon Valley, home to many emerging and global technology companies. Despite this, the city maintains strong agricultural roots, with crops such as tomatoes, alfalfa, and peaches. In the 1970s, Tracy had only 15,000 residents, but it grew in popularity and population as the Bay Area expanded. Sandra's family settled in this growing city. Sandra, a second grader at Melville Jacobson Elementary School, had long, light brown hair with golden highlights from spending a lot of time in the sun. She was a sweet, innocent, bright, and amiable child who loved visiting neighborhood friends, doing cartwheels, and reading children's books. Her friendly nature allowed her to make friends easily, and she was always ready to help. Her favorite character was Hannah Montana. On Friday, March 27, 2009, after school, the 8-year-old visited a friend's house before returning home around 4 p.m. to check in with her family. She then went out again, saying she was going to play at another friend's house. It was common for neighborhood kids to play at each other's homes and in the open spaces of the park, which included a basketball court and a pool. However, that evening was unusual because Sandra did not return home as expected, which was highly unusual for her. She always knew to check in with her mother by dinner time. The family grew increasingly anxious when they discovered that the friend Sandra mentioned was not home that afternoon. Sandra had never left the trailer park area before. At 7:53 p.m., the family, now very worried, called 911 to report Sandra missing. The police began their search at Sandra's home and expanded throughout the neighborhood. They collected footage from a surveillance camera near the family's residence, which showed Sandra crossing the street in front of her house. This video was broadcasted on national news channels to aid in the search. The police conducted a thorough search of the mobile home park and interviewed all residents but found no leads. The FBI joined the search over the weekend of March 28th and 29. Police dogs, rescue teams, all-terrain vehicles, and a California Highway Patrol helicopter were all involved in the intense search effort. More than 250 people from 13 different agencies participated. Divers searched a nearby lake, but found nothing. Officers went door to door in the park, questioning every resident and inspecting all vehicles. The search continued without pause. The authorities even offered a $22,000 reward for information about the case, but no traces of Sandra were found. The first suspect was a local man named Frank, who had been seen kissing Sandra on the lips 2 years earlier at the local pool when she was 6. Frank, about 60 years old, had been spotted by Sandra's grandmother in 2007, brushing her hair away and kissing her on the lips. The family had reported this incident at the time. With Sandra's disappearance, Frank was questioned by investigators. He claimed he had nothing to do with the incident and had kissed her only to be nice. The police seized some of his CDs as part of the investigation. Detectives also interviewed Sandra's father, Daniel Cantu, but he lived in Mexico and had minimal contact with his daughter, having not seen her for over a year. The tragic discovery came 10 days after Sandra's disappearance, on April 6, 2009. Agricultural workers draining a reservoir a few miles from the neighborhood, a task they perform twice a year, made a shocking find. At the bottom of the reservoir, measuring about 150 meters long and 30 meters wide, they found a suitcase. Inside was Sandra's body, curled in a fetal position. She was wearing the same clothes she had on when she went missing: a Hello Kitty t-shirt gifted by a neighbor for her birthday and black leggings. The horrifying crime stunned the residents of Tracy, leaving Sandra's family devastated. For days, dozens of people left flowers, posters, candles, and stuffed animals in her memory. An autopsy revealed that Sandra had been beaten and sexually assaulted with a foreign object before being asphyxiated. Toxicology reports showed she had ingested a powerful sedative. The suitcase was identified as belonging to Melissa Huckabee. FBI experts developed a preliminary profile of the suspect, believing it to be a white male between 25 and 40 years old, with a criminal history involving sexual assault or child pornography, who kidnapped for sexual purposes and then killed. They initially focused on all the men in the trailer park, but later turned their attention to a completely different suspect when they identified the suitcase's owner. Playing in the enemy's house, Melissa Huckabee was born on February 23, 1981, in Orange County, California. She was the eldest of 9 grandchildren. At 28 years old, Melissa was a volunteer Sunday school teacher at the Tracy Baptist Church, where her grandfather served as pastor. She grew up in Southern California and lived between Tracy and Orange County after high school. As an adult, she faced difficult times and struggled to find and keep a stable job. In 2002, Melissa Huckabee filed a restraining order against an ex-boyfriend, accusing him of harassment, death threats, and assaulting her grandfather. That chapter soon ended, and in August 2003, while 5 months pregnant, she married her then-boyfriend Johnny Huckabee. That same year, Melissa declared bankruptcy with debts totaling $26,300, including thousands of dollars in medical bills and credit card expenses. Her struggles continued as her marriage did not work out. They separated in August 2004 and their divorce was finalized in September 2005. Divorce documents revealed that Melissa accused Johnny of kidnapping their daughter and domestic violence, charges which Johnny vehemently denied. Despite this, Melissa gained full custody of their daughter, Madison. Melissa, always a loving mother with a strong religious upbringing, lived in Southern California, where she worked as an event planner and studied criminology at a community technical institute. She loved crime dramas, especially the popular series Law and Order. Despite her efforts, Melissa led a solitary life and had a history of mental health issues, including severe conditions such as borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. According to her family, she struggled to raise her daughter alone and sometimes experienced episodes of depression. Additionally, she had a history of self-harm, cutting her ankles to balance her mind. She was prescribed several potent medications, including benzodiazepines, amphetamines, and an antidepressant. Melissa also took furosemide, a diuretic used for heart problems and hypertension. In 2007, Melissa was considered a person of interest by police in connection with 2 fires in La Palma, California, about 300 miles from Tracy, but she was never charged. In June 2008, her grandparents asked Melissa to help them pack for a move to Tracy, changing her plans. She had lived in Tracy years earlier and decided to settle there again with Madison, moving into her grandparents' trailer. Sandra Cantu lived in the same neighborhood, just 5 houses away. In January 2009, a 7-year-old girl went missing for several hours in the trailer park, prompting a police report and an intense search that lasted several hours. Melissa eventually brought the girl home, but according to the family, the child appeared drugged. She could barely speak and cried incessantly, unable to stand or walk without assistance, collapsing each time she tried. Her parents took her to the hospital where tests revealed benzodiazepines in her bloodstream, medications typically prescribed as sedatives or to induce sleep, alleviate anxiety, muscle spasms, and prevent seizures. The family feared the girl had been sexually abused, but medical examinations showed no evidence of this. A Tracy police officer interrogated Melissa, who reacted indignantly to the accusation. At the same time, it was revealed that the girl's mother had drug problems. With no evidence against Melissa, the case did not proceed. Another peculiar incident highlighted Melissa's odd behavior. She told a 37-year-old man she occasionally dated that she was pregnant, leading him to decide to marry her. Melissa even had the phone number of a bridal shop written in her notebook. On March 2, 2009, the couple met at the church, where Melissa gave Daniel a drink that he found to have a strange taste. He could not remember anything after that night. The police later found Daniel unconscious near a fast food restaurant. He woke up in jail but never reported Melissa. This incident occurred about 3 weeks before Sandra's death. On the day Sandra disappeared, while the police were searching the area, Melissa sent a text message to Maria, Sandra's mother, asking her to inform the police that something had been stolen from her house around 4 p.m. She added that she wasn't sure if this information would impact the investigation. Earlier, Melissa had called the manager of the trailer park to report a stolen black suitcase she claimed to have left outside her home. She even mentioned the stolen suitcase in media interviews. The day after Sandra vanished, During a vigil for her, a very agitated and tearful Melissa approached investigators, saying she found a note on the ground. The note, filled with spelling errors, read, "Cantu locked in a suitcase thrown in water on Bucketty Road and Whitehall Road. Witness." Suddenly, Melissa's demeanor changed, and she became completely calm, which caught the attention of the officers. At the time of Sandra's death, Melissa was on probation for a 2006 theft in Los Angeles, but she had no record of violent behavior. 2 days before Sandra's body was discovered, Melissa was admitted to a local hospital, claiming she had accidentally swallowed a razor blade while sleepwalking, which seemed to be a suicide attempt. Before Sandra's body was found, Melissa was not a primary suspect. She was interviewed several times, but the police believed she was merely seeking attention and had no evidence linking her to Sandra's disappearance. However, everything changed when Sandra's body was found in the very suitcase Melissa had reported stolen. Investigators then began to scrutinize Melissa's behavior more closely. Another crucial clue emerged when a retired Marine and his wife informed the police that they had seen Melissa in her SUV at the irrigation pond on their property at Bucketty and Whitehall Streets between 5:30 and 6 p.m. on March 27th. The couple recognized Melissa from television and noted that she appeared distracted and in a hurry when they saw her. Melissa had told them she stopped there because she needed to urinate. The police quickly continued reviewing the surveillance footage from the camera outside Sandra's house and observed that the girl was walking towards Melissa's house at 3:54 p.m. on March 27th. The camera also captured Melissa's SUV driving in the opposite direction 8 minutes later. Soon after, Melissa called the neighborhood manager to report a stolen suitcase. Around 5:30 p.m., a surveillance camera in the church parking lot recorded Melissa driving towards the irrigation pond, and half an hour later, she was seen returning. New evidence surfaced at the church when FBI agents conducted a thorough search and found a metal rolling pin in the kitchen with a blood stain and a bent handle. DNA analysis confirmed the blood matched Sandra's. They also discovered that the cord used to close the suitcase was the same type missing from the blinds in the Sunday school classroom. Investigators interviewed Melissa's grandfather and collected several items from the family home. On a computer at the house, they found a news article from September 2008 about Diverse finding a suitcase containing the remains of a missing 4-year-old girl. On April 9, 2009, Melissa was discharged from the hospital at 7 a.m. Later, she went to the police station for another round of questioning. After an hour, she was asked to return the next day. On April 10th, she underwent 6 hours of intense interrogation. Over time, Melissa broke down, transitioning from calm to distressed. She eventually admitted to causing Sandra's death, but fabricated an elaborate story of accidental death and panic. Melissa claimed that on that day, she intended to take the suitcase to the church, but encountered Sandra and decided to play hide and seek. She said she told Sandra to get into the suitcase, then zipped it up. According to her bizarre account, Melissa left her keys and cell phone, drove to the church, and forgot about Sandra. When she returned and opened the suitcase, she found the girl lifeless. She claimed she tried to revive her and placed a small towel on her forehead to cool her. Panicking, Melissa said she then decided to dump the suitcase in the reservoir. The story was obviously not credible, leading to Melissa's detention in the county jail. Initially, she broke down in tears but soon regained her composure. 4 days after her arrest, Melissa was charged with murder with special circumstances of rape with a foreign object, lewd acts with a minor, and murder during a kidnapping. According to the prosecutor's charges, Sandra's death was premeditated and malicious following sexual abuse. The police believed Sandra was heading to Melissa's house to play, as seen in the surveillance footage, and was killed shortly after arriving. However, the police could not establish a motive for the crime. The community was shocked by the news. It was hard to believe that a local resident, a mother whose child played with other neighborhood kids, could commit such a brutal act. Melissa even received death threats, prompting heightened security measures during her court appearances. The trial was marked by shock and disbelief. Melissa appeared in court for the reading of the charges, wearing a red prison jumpsuit and shackles. She had marks on her forehead, apparently self-inflicted, and she cried and trembled as the judge listed the charges. Given the nature of the accusations, she faced either the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the hearing, Melissa's defense requested a court order for a medical evaluation of the accused and a gag order to prevent case details from influencing the jury. Many of Sandra's and Melissa's family members wept during the hearing, with immense pain evident, especially when the charge of rape was mentioned. Melissa reacted strongly, closing her eyes and stifling a sob. Her father expressed that the family was in shock and did not recognize Melissa as their own. Her ex-husband stated that although Melissa had struggled with emotional issues and had been medicated, he never believed she could be violent. He was utterly astonished by the charges against her. When he saw her in court, he did not recognize her. Johnny had no further contact with Melissa or their daughter and sought custody after Melissa's incarceration. He remarried and had other children. Following the charges, there were at least 3 hearings in which Melissa refused to plead guilty or not guilty, delaying the judicial process. Finally, in June, she pleaded not guilty. In August, the district attorney added more charges related to drugging a 7-year-old girl in 2007 and her ex-boyfriend Daniel in March 2009. In April 2010, the defense requested the exhumation of Sandra's body for a second autopsy, but eventually withdrew the request. The county's chief medical examiner explained that relevant samples had been preserved for independent analysis, should the defense wish to determine if Sandra had been raped. Finally, on May 10, 2010, nearly a year after pleading not guilty in a routine pre-trial hearing, 29-year-old Melissa changed her plea. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances of kidnapping. Melissa made a deal with the prosecution to drop the other charges against her, including lewd acts with a minor, rape, and drugging a 7-year-old girl and her ex-boyfriend. By admitting guilt, she aimed to avoid a potential death sentence. After the gag order was lifted, more details about how Melissa killed Sandra emerged. Based on the pathologist's report, the prosecutor stated that Sandra was suffocated with a piece of cloth soaked in alcohol. Authorities also found a blood-stained piece of fabric tied around Sandra's head and knotted with a rope. The cause of death was homicidal asphyxiation. According to prosecution documents, Melissa sedated Sandra, took her to the church, and sexually assaulted her with a foreign object, apparently the rolling pin that was found. Ultimately, Melissa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the day of her sentencing, she could only say she did not understand why she committed the horrific crime. She acknowledged that she would have to struggle with that question for the rest of her life. Sobbing, she apologized to Sandra's family, admitting she should never have taken Sandra from them. Melissa said she owed them an explanation, but still couldn't comprehend her actions. She also stated that she would live with the fact that she killed a sweet, innocent girl like Sandra for the rest of her life. That day, Melissa denied raping Sandra. She told Sandra's mother that Sandra did not suffer and that there was no sexual abuse. She asked for her forgiveness, although she admitted she couldn't imagine forgiving someone who harmed her own child. However, Melissa's claims were contradicted by the pathologist's report, which revealed that Sandra had a cut on her lower lip, an abrasion on her elbow, and injuries to her genital area. Toxicology tests also found traces of a medication used to treat anxiety disorders in Sandra's body. It was also proven that Melissa had written the note indicating where Sandra's body was located in the suitcase. The lingering mystery remains. Why did she do it? Melissa's history of mental disorders seems key. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which affects how people feel about themselves and others, causing significant problems in everyday life. Those with the disorder often experience intense fear, impulsivity, and frequent mood swings. The prosecutor in the case speculated that Melissa killed Sandra simply to gain attention. The prosecutor suspected that Madison might also have been a victim of her mother. Madison had a history of frequent illnesses requiring hospital care. Moreover, Melissa had a record of self-harm and setting fires, and had verbally or psychologically attacked others to draw attention. According to the prosecution, after the murder, she achieved her goal of being the center of attention. Another theory suggested that jealousy was the motive, as Sandra was loved by everyone, whereas Madison, who meant everything to Melissa, did not garner the same admiration. These, however, are speculations. Investigators are certain it was a premeditated crime, and they believe Melissa had been practicing by drugging the other 7-year-old girl and her ex-boyfriend before ultimately killing Sandra. Melissa's case is notable not only for its cruelty, but also because it is rare for women to commit such crimes. Only between 5% and 15% of sexual predators are women. Furthermore, they rarely commit sexual offenses against children, and when they do, they are generally accomplices rather than perpetrators. Women are typically seen as nurturing and less threatening, so images of women accused of sexual abuse are particularly shocking to our sensibilities. According to the United States Department of Justice, approximately 1 in 10 homicides is committed by women. When women kill, it is more likely that their victims are close to them, such as their children, boyfriends, or spouses. The traditional role of women is to care, not to kill, and when a woman commits murder, it is more often in self-defense or due to some form of mental illness. Sandra's case defied all these paradigms, and Melissa's motivation for ending the child's life remains a mystery. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
I don't even think that I could even describe what I saw, let alone what I felt. But I found my mom.
Jennifer Jackson was born on November 10, 1965, in Tennessee, USA. While details about her parents remain unknown, it is known that she had 2 sisters, Cindy and Grace, and a half-brother named Eric. Information about her life started becoming available around 1980, and she was consistently described as a kind-hearted person. At around the age of 15, Jennifer moved to Memphis to live with her aunt and uncle. Her family was involved with the Church of the Holy Communion in Memphis, where her uncle served as a reverend. Jennifer demonstrated a strong drive for achievement and dedication to her studies from an early age. Besides her academic pursuits, she had a passion for sports, especially challenging ones, which led her to become a triathlete and excel in competitions. Jennifer enrolled at Memphis State University and graduated in 1985 with a degree in business administration at just 20 years old. Those who knew her during this period noted that she was not only an excellent student, but also compassionate and generous. After completing her studies, she married Nazmi Hassania, a former army captain of Lebanese origin. On March 17, 1987, they welcomed their first and only child, Nora. However, the couple soon divorced, and Jennifer raised her daughter as a single mother. Jennifer did not let the end of her marriage discourage her. She remarried when Nora was in elementary school, but the relationship turned abusive and ended in 2001. Her brother Eric later revealed that the man had even brought a gun to the divorce negotiations. Jennifer then began dating Mark Irvin, a Methodist minister. However, this relationship was also unstable, with frequent breakups and reconciliations. Jennifer's friends did not like Mark, and Nora later described him as controlling and manipulative. Jennifer and Nora lived in a beautiful house in the Memphis suburbs. Jennifer worked as an investment banker at SunTrust Capital Markets, where she was very successful and earned a salary that allowed her to comfortably support her small family. During this time, Nazmi reappeared in their lives. Despite having been absent during Nora's early years, Nazmi attempted to mend their relationship when she reached her teenage years. Nazmi owned a convenience store and also ran a limousine business. Although everything seemed legitimate on the surface, a tragic event brought his activities under scrutiny by the authorities. On the night of January 26, 2004, an unidentified man entered Nazmi's store with the intent to rob it. Nazmi apparently resisted, and the robber shot him, causing his immediate death. When the police were notified, they arrived at the scene, initially believing it was a robbery gone wrong. However, certain elements led them to suspect that it was a planned attack by someone who knew Nazmi well. Upon reviewing the security camera footage, detectives saw the assailant not only stealing cash from the register, but also entering Nazmi's office, seemingly searching for something specific beyond just money. The convenience store was located across from a strip club, and its patrons frequently used Nazmi's limousine services. Rumors soon emerged that Nazmi rented his limousines for questionable activities and possessed compromising video evidence of clients. Given this information, authorities theorized that the attacker was looking for those videotapes and that Nazmi's murder had a deeper motive than simple robbery. It was also speculated that the incident might be connected to the Mexican drug cartel, Los Zetas. However, no concrete evidence emerged to identify the attacker, and the case eventually went cold. At the time of her father's death, Nora was 16 years old. The impact of his passing seemed minimal, as her mother had always been her primary support. Observers noted the close relationship between Jennifer and Nora. Jennifer was devoted to pleasing and indulging her daughter, and Nora confirmed they had an open line of communication, keeping no secrets from each other. However, Nora was a rebellious teenager, unlike her studious mother. By 2005, Nora was enrolled in the Gateway Homeschool program due to her struggles in formal education. She had previously attended various public and private schools, facing numerous issues. At 18, she was still in the 11th grade, typically for students aged 16. This was a constant concern for Jennifer, leading to frequent arguments about Noura's future. At one point, Noura expressed a desire to join the military instead of continuing her education. Noura often partied, used drugs and alcohol, and skipped classes. She wanted to be independent, and Jennifer was struggling to discipline her. As a single mother, Jennifer found it challenging to manage her daughter's behavior. By mid-2005, she decided to take serious action to address Noura's misconduct. She gave Noura an ultimatum. If she didn't start behaving and showing dedication to her studies, she would be sent to a boarding school. This, of course, led to more arguments and tension between the two. However, any quarrel between mother and daughter would pale in comparison to the tragedy that was about to strike the family. On June 4, 2005, Jennifer attended a wedding while Noura spent the afternoon getting a manicure in preparation for her evening plans. She first went to an Italian festival with her boyfriend and friends, then spent the night partying as was her habit. Recently, she had argued with Jennifer, and after consuming alcohol and cannabis, Noura vented to her friends, complaining about her mother and using derogatory language to describe her. According to her friends, Noura left the party around midnight. After driving for a while and stopping at a gas station to buy cigarettes, she arrived home around 5 a.m. Jennifer should have been home from the wedding for several hours by then and likely sleeping peacefully. However, on her way to her room, Noura noticed her mother's bedroom door was open and the bathroom light was on, which was unusual. Upon entering the room, she discovered a horrifying scene. Jennifer was lying at the foot of the bed, completely naked and covered in blood. Initially, Noura tried to find a pulse and shook her mother repeatedly, trying to get a response. When there was no reaction, she ran to her neighbor for help, telling him someone had broken into their house and her mother was bleeding. The neighbor grabbed his gun and went back with Noura to the house. Once there, Noura called 911, telling the operator the same thing she had told her neighbor. Distressed and crying, she repeatedly asked for an ambulance to be sent. Unfortunately, there was no way to save Jennifer. Authorities arrived at the scene around 5:15 a.m. on June 5th. The first thing they noticed in the room, now a crime scene, was that Jennifer had been repeatedly attacked with a sharp weapon and her head was covered with a wicker basket. Despite being naked, there were no apparent signs of sexual assault, although this would need to be confirmed by the forensic examiner. The level of violence used in the fatal attack indicated a significant amount of rage towards the victim. Combined with the fact that her face had been covered, authorities suspected that the attacker knew Jennifer. The crime appeared to be deeply personal. Authorities estimated Jennifer's time of death to be between 1 and 3 a.m. The chief medical examiner of Shelby County determined that Jennifer had died from multiple stab and puncture wounds, 50 in total, distributed across her chest, abdomen, back, neck, and arms. He concluded that 2 different knives might have been used, or it could have been a single weapon with both a sharp and serrated edge. He also found defensive wounds on Jennifer's hands and a recent contusion on the left side of her head caused by a blunt object. Sexual assault was ruled out. During their search of the house, police noticed broken glass in the kitchen from a door leading to the garage. However, the glass appeared to have been broken from the inside, aligned with a lock visible only from inside the house. Additionally, the exterior doors to the garage were locked, suggesting the scene might have been staged. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing residents, but no one had seen an intruder that night. The first suspect was Mark, Jennifer's on and off boyfriend. The detectives discovered that Mark had called Jennifer the night of her murder. During questioning, Mark claimed he was asleep at his home in Jackson, Tennessee, 90 minutes away from Jennifer's house, at the time of the crime. Despite this alibi, his repeated follow-up calls to the police for updates on the case aroused suspicion. However, further interrogation confirmed he had no involvement in the events of June 5th. With Mark ruled out, police turned their attention to another possible suspect, Noura. In her interview with the detectives, Noura recounted her activities that night, saying she had driven around after leaving the party. What she didn't mention was that she had stopped at a nearby Walgreens to buy first aid supplies. The police discovered this after finding a bag with these items in Noura's car. She had purchased bandages, peroxide, and other items typically used to treat a cut. Previously, authorities had noticed Noura had a bandaged hand, which she explained as a cut from a broken beer bottle at the Italian festival. Security videos from Walgreens showed Noura purchasing the items around 4 in the morning, and she admitted they were for treating a cut she had sustained. However, authorities were skeptical of her story, as the video suggested the cut was fresh, not several hours old. Over the following days, Noura gave different answers each time she was asked about her whereabouts on the night of the crime and how she injured her hand. On June 8, 2005, Noura was admitted to a facility in the Memphis area known for treating mental health and substance abuse issues. While she was hospitalized, her mother's funeral took place. The funeral services and subsequent burial for Jennifer were held on Friday, June 10, 2005, at the Church of the Holy Communion. Noura was allowed to attend the funeral but returned to the health center afterward. Upon her release from the hospital, Noura was permitted to live on her own since she was of legal age. Her aunts reported tension between them and Noura regarding the money from Jennifer's life insurance. The specific issue was how much of the money would be allowed for Noura's apartment rent. Noura did not seem to be mourning her loss. In fact, once she settled into her apartment, she frequently hosted parties. Several friends later mentioned that her place was a popular spot for drinking, with no parental supervision. By the end of the summer of 2005, after just a month in the apartment, Noura was evicted for causing disturbances, violating the lease, and having an unauthorized pet. While Noura continued her fast-paced life, authorities pressed on with their investigation. They initially found her attire suspicious. Known for being particular about her appearance, she was wearing a worn gray long-sleeved shirt on the night of the murder. This was unusual given that summer was approaching, and it was quite warm in Memphis. Noura later claimed she simply dressed that way, even wearing long sleeves to the beach. But to the authorities, her clothing choice seemed like an attempt to conceal something. The police also examined her cell phone records and noticed a suspicious pattern. Noura was typically glued to her phone, but on the night of the murder, between 1 and 3 in the morning, there was no activity at all. This time frame matched the estimated time of Jennifer's death. After speaking with the victim's family and friends, authorities learned that Jennifer and Noura had been experiencing significant conflict and frequent arguments about Noura's behavior. They also heard that Noura had shown an interest in what she would inherit if something happened to her mother. This led the police to form a hypothesis about what happened on June 5th. According to their theory, Noura and Jennifer had another argument, and in a fit of rage, Noura attacked her mother. After committing the crime, Noura allegedly cleaned up the scene and tried to cover it up. The police speculated that Noura left the house after brutally attacking Jennifer, drove to a friend's house, and then returned hours later, pretending to discover the horrific scene. One of the details the police used to support this hypothesis was Noura's 911 call. At one point, the operator asked if her mother had been shot, and Noura responded that she hadn't. According to the detectives, it wasn't immediately apparent how the wounds were inflicted, so only the attacker would know for sure. However, the police's theory was based on conjecture, relying on the tense relationship between Noura and her mother and considering Noura's rebellious behavior. They found drops of Jennifer's blood on the front step of the house, leading them to think Noura had disposed of evidence far away. But they never found the murder weapon or the bloody clothes Noura would have worn if she had committed the crime. They also didn't find any of Noura's or Jennifer's blood in Noura's car. Upon examining all the evidence, they discovered some hair strands in Jennifer's hand. A preliminary examination suggested it could be Jennifer's own hair. A more detailed analysis to confirm the hair's origin was never conducted. Another crucial piece of evidence that contradicted the police's hypothesis was Noura's nails. The police said Jennifer had fought her attacker, but Noura's manicure was in perfect condition the next morning, as shown in photos taken at the police station. Additionally, she had no injuries or bruises on her body, except for the cut on the back of her hand, indicating there had been no physical altercation or struggle. Eventually, the authorities found DNA evidence at the crime scene that did not match either Noura or Jennifer. They could not identify the source of the sample, but they were certain it did not belong to any family member. Despite the lack of forensic evidence linking her to the crime, Noura was charged with first-degree murder and arrested on September 29, 2005. Many of Jennifer's friends and acquaintances supported Noura's innocence, describing her as a devoted and loving daughter, incapable of committing such a crime against her mother. According to a family friend, Noura would often cancel plans to be with her mother whenever Jennifer needed her. These supporters felt the police were overlooking an important fact. Less than a year and a half earlier, Noura's father had been attacked, and after his death, Jennifer inherited his entire estate. This led some to believe that Jennifer might have unknowingly become the next target of the same people who had killed her ex-husband. However, the authorities dismissed this hypothesis, claiming they had investigated any possible connection between the two fatal attacks. Another aspect the investigators did not consider was Jennifer's numerous volatile relationships with various men. Although they were aware of her tumultuous romance with the religious minister Mark, they overlooked the fact that in the months leading up to her death, Jennifer frequently dated and spent nights with strangers. On October 5th of that year, Noura pleaded not guilty to the charge of murdering her mother. She was given a bail amount of $500,000, which she could not afford, leading to her being held at the Federal Correctional Facility in Memphis for the next 3 years awaiting trial. Finally, on February 9, 2009, Noura Jackson's trial began. As the state presented its case, Noura sat alone in the courtroom without any family members by her side. The defense attorney took on her case pro bono. She argued that the authorities had no concrete evidence incriminating Noura beyond a reasonable doubt for the heinous crime against her mother. Valerie pointed out that Jennifer had been attacked more than 50 times, and it was hard to believe that her teenage daughter could have desired her death, let alone committed such a brutal act. Noura did not testify during her trial, and the defense did not call any witnesses. However, her attorney cross-examined several prosecution witnesses to demonstrate that the case against her client was weak and unfounded. The prosecution's DNA expert testified that neither Noura's blood nor DNA was found at the crime scene. He also confirmed that the authorities had not conducted tests on the hair found in Jennifer's hands. The defense attorney insisted that forensic evidence did not lie, and nothing at the crime scene implicated Noura. She also criticized the crime scene investigator, suggesting he had overlooked evidence pointing to another person. She highlighted a cat that appeared in some photos, implying there were other overlooked details in the investigation. Noura's pet cat had roamed freely around the crime scene during the investigation, potentially compromising the integrity of the collected evidence. The prosecution called several of the accused and victims' family members and friends to testify. A friend of Noura testified that around 1 a.m. on June 5, 2005, she received a call from the Jackson House phone, followed seconds later by a call from Noura's cell phone. Another friend testified that the night before Jennifer's murder, Noura had spoken ill of her mother, saying she should go to hell. A third friend told the jury that Noura called him between 4 and 5 a.m. on the night of the crime, asking him to meet her at her house. He was the only witness to definitively place Noura at the crime scene before the discovery of the body and the 911 call. The prosecution asked all of Noura's friends if they had noticed any cuts or bandages on her hands during the parties she attended before returning home, and they all said no. However, one friend mentioned during cross-examination that Noura had asked for a Band-Aid at the party on Saturday night. The neighbor Noura sought help from also testified. He recounted the events of that morning and noted it was strange that Noura entered the house ahead of him, even though he was armed and she was visibly scared of a potential intruder. Pastor Mark Irwin testified that he and Jennifer were not together at the time of the crime and that their breakup had been mutual. He reiterated that he was asleep at his home, 90 minutes away from the crime scene during the incident. He admitted to calling Jennifer but hung up before she could answer, realizing it was too late to be calling. One of Noura's aunts testified for the prosecution, mentioning a heated argument between Jennifer and Noura about Noura's drug use and partying lifestyle just a week before the murder. Noura's uncle also testified, discussing Noura's supposed interest in Jennifer's life insurance policy. Noura later said this statement hurt the most, as she loved her uncle dearly. After questioning 45 witnesses over 9 days, the prosecution rested. During closing arguments, the defense accused the authorities of conducting an incompetent investigation and urged the jury to prioritize forensic evidence over circumstantial evidence. However, on February 21, 2009, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Noura guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser charge than initially brought but still severe for a young woman who maintained her innocence. But the story was far from over. On February 26th, 5 days after the verdict and a month before the sentencing hearing, the prosecution submitted a state notice regarding the omission of a statement related to the testimony of Andrew Hommick. The friend who had placed Noura at the crime scene between 4 and 5 a.m. attached to this notice was a copy of Andrew's third statement. This was a handwritten note he had given to the police on June 13, 2005, approximately a week after his first 2 statements. In this third statement, written on the back of a letter addressed to one of his roommates, Andrew recounted a completely different version of events from the early hours of June 5th. He remembered going out with 3 friends and meeting another at a cinema near Noura's house. After leaving there, they went to a party, and during this time, Noura called one of the young men's phones looking for Andrew, as he had left his phone elsewhere. Andrew said they stayed at the party for a while but left when one of their friends tried to start a fight. He mentioned they had taken ecstasy. Around 3:57 a.m., Andrew and another friend wanted to go to a strip club. They stopped for gas and eventually decided to go home. Shortly after, they fell asleep. Noura's defense team filed a motion for a new trial, citing numerous issues, including the state's failure to disclose Andrew's third statement, which they argued violated her right to a fair trial. The trial court denied Noura's request for a new trial, and on March 27, 2009, she was sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison. However, her legal team did not stop fighting for justice. In 2012, they filed a motion with the Court of Criminal Appeals, which again ruled in favor of the prosecution, upholding Noura's conviction and sentence. Soon after, a new appeal was filed with the Tennessee Supreme Court. On August 22, 2014, after Noura had spent nearly a decade in prison, they finally secured approval for a new trial. According to the defense lawyer, this was the first case in Tennessee where a conviction was overturned due to 12 instances of constitutional misconduct. The court concluded that the prosecutor had violated a legal norm when she directly addressed Noura during her closing arguments, demanding that she tell the court exactly where she had been on the night of the crime. The first episode of misconduct and the second was that the prosecution withheld potentially exculpatory evidence from the defense by not disclosing Andrew's third statement, which contradicted his earlier testimony and statements. In January 2015, after a 5-month delay, the prosecution agreed to hand over Noura's case to the district attorney's office of a neighboring district. In May of that year, the new prosecutor offered Noura a deal, a reduced sentence if she pled guilty to manslaughter. On May 20th, Noura entered an Alford plea, where a defendant maintains their innocence but acknowledges that the prosecution has enough evidence to convict them. Although this meant that the true perpetrator who killed her mother would never be found, as Noura would be legally held responsible, she accepted the deal. By then, 28 years old, Noura said in later statements that she had lost faith in the judicial system. The new deal reduced her sentence to 15 years, but with time already served and good behavior credits, she would be released in just over a year. Facing a new trial, there was no certainty about how long it would take to organize or if a new jury would find her innocent. In August 2016, at 29 years old, Noura was released from prison, still proclaiming her innocence. A friend of her mother invited Noura to live with her after her release. Shortly after her release, she decided to move to Nashville with a woman she had met in prison and formed a romantic relationship with. Despite the challenges of finding housing as ex-convicts, they managed to rent a nice apartment with lots of greenery and open spaces around it. In March 2017, the prosecutor, after facing state charges of ethical violations, accepted a private reprimand and admitted that an error had been made during Noura's trial. Meanwhile, the dispute between Noura and her family continued. That same year, she reached a private settlement with her aunts, resolving the inheritance issue. Having completed her studies in prison, Noura began applying to various universities while working as a receptionist at an auto repair shop. She expressed a desire to work to help women in prison. Nina Morrison from the Innocence Project agreed to represent Noura, aiming to use advances in DNA studies from the past decade to determine who really killed her mother. As of now, no results have been announced. Meanwhile, Noura continues to rebuild her life after spending her formative years in prison. She maintains her innocence and has appeared on several programs discussing her experience. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.